Mm. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here tonight. Love it when people say their names and or just say where you're from in the chat. That's always very fun. So please do that. We'll get started a little bit after 6:30. We've got Salt Lake City Indivisible. Yay! Love an Indivisible group. Mesa, Arizona. Awesome. I'm going to grab one thing before we get going tonight. I have a really loud cat, everybody, so I'm going to actually take a moment and get things adjusted for her. Oh gosh, we've got Jacksboro, Texas. I haven't heard of that. Grandview, Missouri, right, our neck of the woods. New York, New York. Lee Summit, Oklahoma, New Mexico. Coming from all over. And I will be right back. Denver, Crockett, Texas, Salina. Hey, Salina. There's so many good activist and indivisible groups in Salina, Kansas. Columbus, Mississippi. Very fun. Oh, Colorado Springs. I'm not gonna lie, I'm always a little jealous of the Colorado. Just now 6:30, folks. So I usually wait a couple minutes before we get going just because people invariably have a little bit of trouble logging on. Colorado is well represented at Greeley, Fort Collins, Colorado Springs. Mm. Overland Park, hello, down the road. Dallas. Mm. Awesome. Well, it's a little bit after 6:30, so we're going to go ahead and get going. First of all, thank you everybody for joining us. My name is Nancy Mays, and I am co-founder of an indivisible group called Boots on the Ground Midwest. We are based in Kansas. We are in the suburban ring of the Kansas City metro area. So we serve both Kansas and KCMO folks. Our mission is really to motivate and mobilize people to around preserving democracy. And I honestly can't think of a better topic that fits into this than than healthcare, and how the media and medicine have been fueling patient skepticism, which is what our amazing presenter tonight is going to talk about. Dr. Milkovich is a developmental and behavioral pediatrician at Children's Mercy Hospital here in Kansas City. It is a renowned children's hospital, and I know that in some neck of the woods, it's a little bit, the skepticism around healthcare is stronger in some parts of the country and in some, corners of a city than it is in others. So we really look forward to hearing what Dr. Milkovich has to say, and we will definitely be taking questions as well. So you all can put the questions in the Q&A box. If they're in the chat, that's great. They are a little bit harder to navigate that way. So if you can put them in the chat box, in the Q&A box, that's great. Somebody asked if they would receive the replay, and the answer is yes. We post all of the replays of our Wednesday workshops on our YouTube page, which is Boots on the Ground Midwest. And you can go back and watch any of them, which is really good. So without any further introductions, I'm just going to let Dr. Milkovich speak for herself.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this. I am not necessarily an expert about patient provider trust, but I'll tell you a little bit about myself and kind of my own viewpoints. But I welcome questions, I welcome conversation. That is how I learn, is through other people's experiences. So, I was going to introduce myself a little bit so you can understand my where I'm coming from when I talk about things. So, a as as I was introduced, I am a developmental and behavioral pediatrician. Clinically, what that means is that I help families navigate neurodevelopmental disorders and support families through, like, medical systems and school systems. So that's a piece of me, and I really try to understand, like, what is the function of the behavior? What causes the behavior? But I also bring to the table I'm also a mom, I have 2 kids, and I am a digital media researcher. So that is my real focus. I came to this topic about digital media and medical mistrust because I am part of a group at the American Academy of Pediatrics that brings together digital media researchers and what it used to be referred to as pediatricians. And they were talking about the difficulties that they have of reaching people that aren't within their realm of, like, without reaching outside of their audience. So this all informs what I talk about today. But I want everybody to come with it with, like, an open mind and maybe some of your own questions or some of thinking about solutions because I don't have the answers. I just am here to kind of think about, like, this is why people mistrust medicine right now. It's kind of how I'm coming out of it and how digital media is informing that. So today I plan to talk about identifying methods that how digital media uses to shape what people think about healthcare and science, evaluate systemic factors within the medical system, and then this is where I need your guys' help too, explore practical ways to rebuild trust in medicine. So first, I'm going to talk about the identifying methods, and this is, like I said, this is my interest is how digital media shapes our behavior. And I think it's just really, really, really fascinating the power of digital media. And so I kind of went down a rabbit hole about, and these are again just some of my ideas that I have that's supported by research. I love talking about how digital media thrives on our emotional and neurobiological responses. There's been some really fascinating literature that's come out recently about functional brain MRIs and when we're exposed to digital media content. And what a functional brain MRI is that get a scan, it looks at your brain, but then the researchers show you different types of content and then they can see how active your brain is. And this study that was done a couple of years ago back in 2022, they had young adults in the brain MRI and they would show them positive or negative content. And what they noticed is it was statistically significant the differences that they were feeling or that they were seeing on the functional brain MRI, the different parts of the brain that had been reactive. based on the type of content that they saw. And if you think about it yourself, that makes a lot of sense. When I see something positive, I feel neurobiologically like I feel calm, or maybe I'll feel happy, maybe I laugh, right? Those are all biological responses. But when I see something scary or sad or angry, I I feel differently. And so although we know this, it's really interesting to show that there's statistically significant difference based on how people view media. I wanted to talk a little bit as I was preparing for this presentation, I wanted to talk a little bit about how just specific words in media can shape how we react. And so I've this is the same article, and I clipped three different headlines just to kind of talk about just kind of show how media, just the way that words that they choose to use or what they choose to highlight, can make us feel differently. So this is the first one. For a perfect ear of corn, weather has to cooperate, but that's a tough task. So that's pretty benign. The next one. To get that perfect ear of corn, weather has to cooperate, but climate change is making it dicier. So adding just climate change, it makes you feel a little bit differently. And then the last one, like the corn's never getting a break. It's just hot all the time. How America's farmers conquered climate change for a monster harvest. And then the story is all the same, but it makes us feel differently. And part of the reason I should have said this at the beginning, part of the reason why I do this work is because I am very susceptible. My brain is very susceptible to feeling strong emotions, and so I started doing this research because I myself have uh, such a intense relationship with digital media. I have found this to be a helpful tool for me. This is called ground news, and what it does is it collects news articles, and so that's where I got all those headlines. It collects news articles from around the air from internationally and tries to put them all together into one headline. But then what's really neat is that it then categorizes is are the groups, are the news sources left, central, or right leaning? And then you can look at all the news sources that it's talking about that same topic. I really again, this is how my brain works. I really appreciate this website because they they portray it in a not frightening way, and then I can, if I want to, click and decide what kind of news article I want to read. That is just that's just a way that I navigate this kind of drama that comes with when we see these shocking headlines. But what's even more fascinating, so that same study, like I mentioned before, they had young adults sitting in a brain MRI when we are sitting. So they showed them positive and negative media content. But what they added then is they added peer reactions to it. So in box A is just the normal content, but in box B is this peer feedback. So they added negative or positive feedback. And look, it's your brain is so much more on fire when there's that added layer of peer feedback. And again, if you go back to how you personally feel, that's how I feel. Like I'm going to get more of a response or have more of emotion if I did this. And so this all started because, again, I try to be vulnerable when I talk because I think that's the only way that we can help understand the way that people see each other is if I try to communicate the way that I see the world. So my interest started because I actually saw this on Facebook. This was shared by it's a screenshot, so I try to make everything de-identified. It's a screenshot of somebody that I was a really, really good friend of mine, but we kind of lost contact, but of course we are Facebook friends. And so she posted this and so great. And it says, her comment was so grateful that her kids and her husband's name and I didn't get this when pressure was strong. And so then it talks about the COVID vaccine. And so when I see this, I see like all these capitalizations, and I see that's my friend that said this. I had this big, strong reaction. I say, I can't believe that she would, repeat this information. How could my friend do this? And because of that, I have to limit my my Facebook now. And not just because of this post, but this has really inspired me to really kind of understand why medicine and science has so much mistrust. And I'll talk a little bit more about what it is. Part of that is, if you notice back here, if you ask a doctor, what are the side effects of a certain intervention, they're going to give you the top side effects. But if you go on to the list, for instance, if you're looking at a medicine, it's going to have a gajillion side effects because when you do a trial to get FDA approval, you have to list everything adverse event that occurred. So all these things could be true. I didn't necessarily go through and read it to verify this, but what we know as physicians is that there's nuance when it comes to science and what the research shows. And that's really hard to portray that nuance in media and digital media because we're wanting that click, that clickbait, that soundbite, and that's just not how science works. As an example, I wanted to talk a little bit about social media and teen mental health disorders because this is the literature that I'm most familiar with. I'm sure you've likely heard about Anxious Generation. That was a book that was published, I don't know, maybe 18 months ago that really told this story about how social media is causing or heavily contributing to the mental health of, you know, we're seeing mental health outcomes in younger people. While parts of that are true, there's not a lot of nuance to that. And what we think is about a third of teens have difficulties with social media, but the majority of them do well. And that's because of a variety of factors. So social media itself does not cause teen mental health disorders. And the same trend, people also forget about something that we use in science is called confounders, or things that could be influencing our data. I thought this was a really great illustration. I'm part of the Center of Excellence on Social Media and Youth Mental Health. I'm not saying that, getting cyberbullied or seeing traumatic content isn't going to make you feel bad, or having FOMO isn't going to make somebody feel bad and have maybe worsening symptoms of depression, or that, um, you know, the the platforms grab your attention and keep your attention so long so that you can't sleep and you can't eat. So all those things are true, but I think there's nuance to that. And so what also is going on when we're having, the uptake of social media is all these other kind of traumatic things that are going on in the world. So I think it's a accumulation of all these things that are probably leading to the mental health um, challenges that we're seeing. Again, digital media is not going to say, well, only 2% of people have this problem, but it only happens if X, Y, and Z. Like that's too long of a headline. They want something that's really catchy and bright. And so it's kind of either black or white. I again wanted to use this as an example. It's a little bit older, like it was done in 2017, but what this study did was they surveyed 14 to 24-year-olds and asked them how they felt about different outcomes and how they related to different social media platforms. And so basically they said, like, does Instagram make your sleep worse or better? And you can see for Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, sleep was the worst. So the darker the red, I guess Snapchat, maybe it's fear of missing out, but the darker the red, meaning the more negative. But if you go down here, depending on what the outcome is, there's actually benefit for the majority of people. Talking about self-expression, self-identity, emotional support. And you think that's actually protective of mental health. Again, this doesn't need to be a digital media lecture, but this is just the content that I am most familiar with. And I'm just trying to explain like the nuance to it, to science. I'm not sure if this is something that you've experienced or this is just something that my social media feeds are telling me, but there's been this recent negative portrayal of medicine and science within the media. I've been getting lots of like doctors overlooked key cancer symptoms and blamed my back pain on my new job, and now I'm going to die. Uh, and so a better way, maybe communicating this would be lower back pain, you know, signs to look out for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. That's the diagnosis that this woman ended up with. So just a way of talking about it that it would be promoting awareness without, again, reinforcing that distrust in the medical system. My sister's a vet, so I often hear about the the lack of research there is in vet medicine. And I just she was talking about this, and I thought this is a great idea. So, man claims popular flea and tick medication killed his dog. Well, I don't know exactly what happened in this story, but my sister said that in her clinic, often people are very concerned about oral flea and tick because there has been digital media stories about dogs dying from oral flea and tick medicine. But what we know, or what vets know, is that it doesn't necessarily cause seizures, but it decreases the seizure threshold. And then also, you're giving preventative medication as the dog gets older. So, is it just older age, or is it the flea and tick? So again, that nuance. And so, how do we communicate this nuance of science within the way that media is wanting us to consume information? This has been very fascinating. Uh, Parasocial relationships are powerful. And what parasocial relationships are is this one-sided relationship that people might feel with influencers or celebrities. But we also have kind of expanded into AI chatbots. I highly recommend this podcast called Flesh and Code. Again, I'm going to say this a couple of times. It helps me understand where people are coming from when they exhibit a behavior that I don't understand or I wouldn't do myself. And the podcast Flesh and Code interviews or goes through, it's kind of it's a docu series talking about these people who have formed really connected relationships with an AI chatbot through Replica, and Replica was created to be a friend. And you can see how you might become connected to somebody because it's basically just texting you back and forth. And this is a chat from, "Hi, I'm happy to see you too. I'm writing an article about you and about Replica." Well, that's really exciting. And so it's just this like fun conversation back and forth. But then it goes into deeper, like asking how you are, checking in, like a friend would do. And so you could understand why somebody would trust and create this really deep relationship with something that might not be, or something that isn't a human. But it's really fascinating about the power of parasocial relationships. I also went down a deep dive about the Liver King, which is he's a very funny guy. He he was talking about the he's an example of a wellness influencer. He was all about the carnivore diet. He ate raw meat, but come to find out, he was very anti. He was obviously selling his own supplements, and you know, very pushing like natural, no vaccinations, no medicine. And come to find out, he was using steroids. He finally admitted to using steroids to get his physique. And then parenting influencers are huge in my world because I hang out with 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 families as a pediatrician. And it's very fascinating how they get reinforced to promote things that might not be science based. So for example, this one's promoting like take my prenatal, and it's just really fascinating because people connect with parasocial relationships. It's not unusual because they see themselves in that person or see who they want to be. And so that person must be right because they're like me or they understand me. And so I will believe what they say. They also, unlike a doctor, they're in your pocket 24/7. And so you can connect with them at any time. So that's why people trust parasocial relationships, even though it doesn't make much sense if you think about it from a scientific perspective. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on in the medical system and how that is making it more difficult to have positive provider patient relationships and building some mistrust. Inequality exists in medicine. And there are real reasons why people should have mistrust in the medical system, in providers, in medicine. Serena Williams really brought this to light, made it public. I don't know if you guys were familiar back in 2018 when she had her baby, she almost died right after childbirth. And we know that Black or African American infants had 2.4 times the mortality rate compared to white infants. And this is data from 2022. And then they were 3.2 times more likely to die from sudden infant death syndrome or impacts from maternal complications of pregnancy. I think this is a measurable outcome of systemic racism. I took this quote from one of Serena's interviews that she did after her medical emergency. So just a little bit of background of what happened. She had a history of pulmonary embolism, which is where you have clots in your lungs. Actually, I'm not sure if she had pulmonary. She had a history of clots, and so she knew that she was at higher risk. And then she had to have a C-section for her first baby, and then afterwards she had progressive shortness of breath and coughing, and so much so that she was coughing so much that her C-section incision ripped open, and so she went back to the surgery multiple times, and she said, "Nobody was listening to me. Nobody was listening to me." And that is a common theme that when you talk to especially Black women about medicine, their experiences in medicine or in the medical system. And so this is a quote from her. I told her, I need to have a CAT scan. I told her, referencing the nurse, I need to have a CAT scan of my lungs bilaterally, and then I need to be on my heparin drip. She said, I think all this medicine is making you talk crazy. I said, no, I'm telling you what I need. I need the scan immediately, and I need it to be done with dye. And so she knew exactly what she needed, but she a lot of people don't have the skills to communicate or advocate for what they need. And so because she was able to advocate, she didn't die, which is pretty crazy that she had to do so much advocating. It just goes, there's just multiple steps where care could have been given earlier for her. And then this is all related back to the historical harm. The Tuskegee study was it's it's a really important part of our history to understand. The US Public Health Service from 1932 to 1972 observed the natural progression of untreated syphilis in Black men. There were 600 participants, 399 with syphilis, and 201 without. And they did this without their consent, and the men believed that they were receiving free health care. They withheld penicillin, even though that was the standard of care found out in the 40s, and which ended up in lots of morbidity and mortality. So no wonder why there's so much mistrust. How could medicine do so much harm? We also, we, I'm, as a doctor, I can say that. So sometimes I don't know the right answer. Sometimes I make the wrong choice. And sometimes we misunderstand science and data. It goes back to the nuance of it. We don't always know the right or wrong answer. I really would recommend, if you guys are interested in this, you don't have to, but I found this podcast very interesting. It was called "Were the Lockdowns Worth It?" It was from the Daily, which is a New York Times podcast. It's titled "Were the Lockdowns Worth It?" and it interviewed Francis Lee and Stephen Macedo. I guess the name is. I. It goes back to intervention development. Again, I can only talk about my own job. I am a developmental behavioral pediatrician, so I prescribe medication for ADHD and anxiety and medications to help with symptoms of autism. We do not have an exact answer for what medications we should use. A lot of it is taking some adult data and using it for kids. You know, we haven't tested every single medicine on every single type of symptom at every single type of age. There's so many variables. And so we're just trying to use the information that we have to make the best decision or help families, guide families to making the right decision. So this really talks about, Francis and Stephen really talk about how why there's so much confusion and why the COVID lockdowns were more hurtful than harmful. And really they start with talking about how there was, even like in 2019, the WHO was talking about pandemic responses, and there was little to no evidence that lockdowns would be helpful or social distancing would be helpful. And then they talked about why we kind of shifted to this, and then why the persistence and the poor implementation caused harm. It's just really fascinating. Again, hindsight's 2020, but to kind of think about, like, if somebody sees this and says, yes, this is what I believed. I knew masks weren't, part of it. So part of the thing was they talked about masks and how at the beginning in February and March of 2020, they were saying, okay, masks only work if you're in the healthcare setting, which was to then help family or help, the rest of the population not hoard the masks. They call it a noble lie in the podcast. But what harm did that do in the future is that, masks were then the thing that we felt that we could control that would keep people safe. And so it just kind of talked about like how when scientists or physicians say things without consistency, transparency, how that leads to mistrust. It's a really fascinating podcast, and they've done some other some other interviews, and Stephen has a book out too. This is my last part of the medical system. I don't know if any of you guys are work in the medical system, but what we know from research, we need to have positive parent, or sorry, it should say patient, not parent. That's a typo. Patient provider relationship. I'm just used to talking about patient or parent and teen relationship. We need to have positive relationships so that we can have these nuanced discussions with our patients. But our current system is eroding it. We know from research these are some characteristics that is helpful for a provider to have so that the patient then feels trust in them. So there needs to be competencies like good communication, professionalism, knowledge, to be motivated, and you have to be flexible and empathetic. As a physician, the current medical system tries to erode my ability to do some of these things. I'm required to see patients at a certain time. I'm required to see a certain amount of patients at a certain date. I have all this paperwork that I have to comply with. So it doesn't allow me the ability to communicate. I have to send quick messages to my patients because so my professionalism may not be where I want it to be because I'm trying to get things done. Knowledge, like what does knowledge mean? Yes, I might be well read on the latest, you know, Journal of Developmental and Behavioral Pediatrics article, but maybe knowledge to my patients might be, does she know alternative medicine for autism? The motivation, burnout is high, high, high in medicine right now. So it's hard to give more motivation to things. And then yes, I try to be flexible, but I am working within a system that is rigid. And that talks a little bit about the research talks a little bit about the medical system, how it needs to be transparent, how you can access it easily, and how it can feel like it's prioritizing care. And and so then if you go back to how parasocial relationships are more beneficial, right? You can have access to them all the time. You feel like they are transparent. They're prioritizing their followers. You know, they have the time to communicate. It just when you think about all the barriers that we currently have in developing relationships, like one, continuity, right? There are barriers to having the same provider time and time again. I just wanted to talk a little bit about practical ways. Again, there's no research that supports this. These are some things that I have experienced or have thought about. Current responses include direct primary care, which is a new phenomenon a lot of my colleagues are going into, which is basically a subscription fee. So it helps people that are affluent connect with their primary care. And so if you pay a certain fee, that means you get access to your primary care whenever you want. And so that you have that really strong relationship with your primary care doctor. Whether it's right or wrong, I know that the reason why it is so effective is because it promotes that patient provider trust. So you can have these nuanced conversations, you can disagree and understand each other's viewpoints. But because without having that safe environment to have these kind of quote unquote controversial conversations, you're not going to make any movement. You have to have a relationship for that. I've been part of some really interesting public health initiatives in my town in my hometown of Kansas City, really trying to provide access where people are to medicine. So that means like a mobile dental unit, that means mobile health fairs where people are, like in their churches. And then something I'm really passionate about, we talk a lot about in medicine health literacy, making sure that our materials that provide patients are understandable to the majority of patients. But I think we also need it as in the medical field, need to think about digital literacy. How do we help families and patients navigate like what is real, what is not real, how and kind of everything that we talked about in that first section of my presentation. These aren't great answers, but these are some of the responses that I've been experiencing. You guys have this is kind of where I wanted to open up other thoughts, ideas. I'm open to brainstorming. And so that's
Excellent.
really all I have.
We have questions. Thank you so much. So let me answer you some of the questions. And then folks, if you have other questions, or comments, just join in the webinar chat. There's comments and questions. So, one question, oh gosh, it was said, okay, it was, they've been very disturbed by what RFK Jr. has said about autistic children destroying families, etc. And that's a way, right, of like, trying to shape a narrative that is not based in science, right?
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
And then that gets shared on Facebook and over and over and over again, right? And in mom groups, et cetera. So I think it's a perfect example. And the person is asking, have you seen any fallout from this terrible negativity around the autism spectrum disorder, the ASD? Yeah.
Yes. Actually, I had clinic yesterday and one of my patients I believe has so I think autism, the diagnosis of autism is a tool that families can take to access resources. So that's
Mhm.
how I find autism. Like the child's going to be the same whether they have an autism or not autism, but I feel like such a valuable tool for to communicate this is what this child needs.
Mhm.
But I had a patient just yesterday saying, I don't want to go through this evaluation because I don't want him to have a diagnosis because what happens if there is a registry? What happens if, there's access to his insurance records, And so there is a lot of fear in some of the families that I see and it's real. It's making us think about how we talk about autism and what we write in our notes.
Wow. That's really interesting. That's very scary. Um, Another question, and I'll just kind of bounce around here is, how much do you think the increasing expense and difficulty in getting to see a doctor is causing negative reactions to doctors in general? You know,
Yes, yes, I think that is so true. It goes back to, like, that access part, right? I
mhm,
hear all the time, like, "Oh, I need a referral to this specialist, but it's gonna be 6 months." So you wait
mhm,
6 months, and the specialist is like, "You're fine." Like, it's just that's not good quality care, and that's not you're not gonna have trust in a medical system if you're not getting the care that is expected or needed. So that
right.
is a huge barrier and frustration.
And do you think though that you said that many of your physician peers were kind of switching to a concierge service, as one listener pointed out, that is going to create a bigger disparity.
Exactly, and that's not an answer, but that is what I have that's what I've experienced as a response. Because that's why I put current responses or whatever I said, I didn't say, like, solutions, because
Yeah.
that's how some of my colleagues are navigating the
Mhm.
frustration of working in this current medical system is, like, I can't deal with insurance and paperwork and all these barriers. I just wanna spend time with my patients, and this is a way that I can spend time with my patients and develop those relationships
Mhm.
and help people. But they do
Mhm.
recognize, like, that's just creating more disparity.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Someone's asking for a clarification, saying they didn't get your point about the podcast, the lockdown podcast. Were you saying that the daily podcast, Are You the Lockdowns, were legitimate data from Lee and Mikado? What were you saying about the podcast in general?
Oh, yeah. So,
Mhm.
I just would really recommend it. Again, I think it's just something to think about. I don't really it just talks about they are political scientists who look at more, like, population-based statistics, and
Mhm.
they're just kinda looking at policy and how that was implemented and taken forward. Their point is before the epidemic, everybody was like the WHO, everyone was in agreement that lockdowns weren't going to be helpful, but we then implemented them and
Mm.
then and why they were implemented and kind of
Mhm.
going on behind like that kind of thought process and then talk about like why like the misinformation or the conflicting stories creates that mistrust in that system. I'm
Mhm.
sorry if I didn't communicate that correctly, but it's just really fascinating. Again, it just talks about like the behavior of why that it created some more mistrust because somebody would say something and then 2 months later they would change, which for me makes sense. Like in science, we don't, like I said, in
Yeah.
science and medicine, we don't know the answer. We can't predict the future. But
Right.
like when somebody says like this is the truth, and then two
Yes.
months later say this is not the truth, right?
Right.
Then that's confusing.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, good. Got a couple of other things here. I see, thank you for the clarification. Someone said, June, I see your question. I'm going to jump right here to Catherine real quick. What are your thoughts regarding the medical education of the next generation of healthcare professionals, including physicians, when it comes to this topic? There's a lot of topics that you just don't really learn about in medical school. I mean, there's never mind for example, addiction. It
Right.
it's just it's people don't really doctors really don't know how to handle that. So what do you think how this will impact the next generation of healthcare professionals when it comes to this topic of mistrust in digital media and where people get their information?
Yeah, I think what we are seeing is that our educational systems are inflexible. Be I'm
Mhm.
passionate about supporting even younger generations, like how do we get it in elementary schools, middle schools, and high
Yeah.
schools so that we
Mhm.
can challenge those thoughts. Yes, I think it's also important in medicine as well, so people are comfortable and confident talking about it. Something that I try to push in my local little clinic is like
Mhm.
we know a couple of influencers that are positive, right? It's like this is just a baby step, right?
Yeah.
If we if families are going to social media for information, how can we help them direct them to the right way, right? And so like that might be a way that we can talk about it. But I think
Mhm.
it's definitely a need. It's just educational systems are inflexible and so it has been really hard to be flexible and
Mhm.
adapt to current issues.
And media literacy in general in this country is just like abhorrent and feel that really needs to be addressed. Okay. So June had asked says she's a consultant for Autism Center of Excellence study of healthy aging in autistic adults. And they have real questions. Hang on, sorry. They have real questions about banking DNA from their subjects with any part of the federal government because we can't trust it to be kept private. And so just wondering if you have that sort of an extension of what you were saying before, right? About people just being so afraid of any kind of future database.
Right.
Um,
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, there's really it right because I was, you know, some people are under the impression like HIPAA, which is what we abide by to keep patient information safe, will
yes.
be valid, but
Mhm.
who knows, right? Like I can't predict the future. Yeah, so there's a real fear. I want to tell my patients like trust trust the system, trust this, you need to do this to get the access to services, but I can't. Like I can't because I there's so much instability.
Is there a place, and I know there's a couple of other questions and I'll get to those, but that this just reminded me, is there a place where you would tell your patients to go online, right? Looking for a, a neutral, unbiased explanation of what they may have that would be in layman's terms. Like where would you direct somebody?
I am most familiar with pediatrics resources, and
Mhm.
so I recommend the American Academy of Pediatrics, Healthy
Okay.
Children, and that's a parent-facing website. Depending on what the content is, I have a lot of different types of resources. Something that I'm really interested in, again, kids are curious. I see kids that are very impulsive. And where do kids often go to find information? The internet. So I
Mhm.
just kind of make it my priority is to give, adolescents, preteen adolescents, some good content about
Mhm.
sexual health and puberty, just so that we're
Mhm.
not Googling things and getting misinformation or seeing things that we shouldn't see.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, there's a wide variety depending on what the topic is.
Mhm,
I You know what, as you say that, I think that'd be a really great idea that we could maybe
mhm,
have a central spot, like, because I know, like, for instance, there's a in medicine, there's an adolescent health group, right, that has their own website, their own society, and so
mhm,
they have all the adolescent medicine websites and influencers
mhm,
that they recommend, but that'd
mhm.
be really a great idea to have it not just about adolescent medicine, but have it in, like, about parenting or
Yeah,
autism, like, anything else that comes
people
up.
don't
That's a
know where
really
to
great idea.
go. I
Right,
mean,
exactly.
I would say WebMD is the one you hear about a lot, but I honestly don't even know, is that a valid source, you know? I will go to a hospital's website,
Yeah, like
and look
Mayo.
for
Yeah,
information. Yeah. Mhm.
yeah.
So here's something that somebody said, and I would be curious if you knew about this. She said that she had heard that during the blood testing for PKU, newborn blood testing, that there are extra blood spots saved now to a database, which is being used by police to reverse solve crime. Have you heard of that?
I have not heard about that. Right.
Okay. Yeah.
I double check. That doesn't mean, that doesn't
Yeah.
mean it's not happening, but, like, I have not heard about it. I think we would have to I don't work in the newborn nursery, but I think I would have definitely been
You would
it'd
have
been a
heard about
hot
that.
topic, right? It'd been a hot topic.
I just had my first grandchild last week, and
Congratulations.
thank you. And they were looking around for a pediatrician, and they went to a pediatrician, and the pediatrician said, "If you want a delayed vaccination schedule, I'm not your pediatrician." Right. So that made me think, okay, so they're getting asked that, right?
Right.
About, can you see my child without vaccinations, or can you see my child with a delayed vaccination schedule? What are some other ways that this misinformation, the RFK haze of medicine is impacting physicians, in your field and broadly? Like, what are some ways that's impacting them? Like, for me, it was like him having to just come out of the gate and defend his position, which would have never happened 5 years ago.
Right. Right.
Mhm,
This has been an interesting conversation. I've talked about it when I was in residency about vaccinations and about, like, do you see families who do a different vaccination schedule or not vaccinate at all? And and everybody's able to make their own viewpoint. But I think for me personally, those are the families that I want to be seen so I can create a relationship so we can have those conversations. I'm fortunate enough that I'm not the primary
oh,
care doctor,
right.
right? And so, like, I don't have to worry about, some of the things that my friends have said that are in primary care, like, well, I don't want an unvaccinated child in, the waiting room with a bunch of newborns, which I understand there's an increased risk. And so I understand, like, I have a different perspective and I'm able to have kind of more, you know,
Mhm,
more nuanced conversations because my appointments are longer. I just have a different medical, you know, setup than a primary care
mhm,
doctor does. And I recognize that. And so I think one thing that we've had to talk about besides the whole vaccination and deciding what our stance is about, do we see vaccinated or unvaccinated, or do we see unvaccinated patients or not,
mhm,
is we have to be on our toes, I feel like, a lot more, which is good. I think that's
mhm.
good. I don't think this is
Yeah.
really it's a bad thing. Like, okay, you say that I should do, you know, for me, I treat children, or I see children who have autism, and something that's been really a hot topic is applied behavioral analysis,
Mhm,
which, 10 years ago, it's like the gold standard. Everybody does ABA, but now there's been a lot of adults with autism who had really intensive ABA services and they had negative experiences and they're communicating those negative experiences. And so now if you go on social media, a lot of it's negative about ABA.
mhm,
Again, there's that nuance part of it, right? I'm sure those adults who had that experience, those are real experiences and that's how they had. That's their experience and that's how they feel about ABA. I'm not taking
mhm.
that away from them, but they probably had a therapist that was inappropriate and some of the
Yeah,
old school techniques aren't right, right? And so, but you need to have that conversation. So there's been a lot of more open dialogue and kind of joint decision making, which again, I'm fortunate because in my world, there's nothing that you have to do. Like, it's not like you have to
right.
get chemotherapy for leukemia. It's like, well, you can do ABA
Yeah,
or you can't do ABA, like
yeah.
both.
You can try whatever you want, right.
Right.
This is an interesting comment. So there are hundreds of online publications that seek out healthcare people to answer questions for a publication. There's varied level of fact checking or credential checking. So those wanting to influence in a negative way as a healthcare professional can be easy. Okay, yeah, it is easy now. You can just set yourself up as an as noted by RFK in his position, right? You can just sort of set yourself up as an expert. Um, and then this person is saying they doubt patients know to go to WebMD because Google may not send them there, right? It might send them to one of those other online publications. That's why I was thinking, like, could
Right.
you tell your patients, like, I mean, not you, but doctors, like,
Right.
hey, if you want to look things up, here are three credible sources, right? Like, I
Right.
remember my pediatrician telling me when to worry at the end of a public, I mean, worry if this
Right.
happens. And then I'd be like, okay, so I'm not going to worry because that hasn't happened, right? But
Right.
now, I mean, that might be great for newborns and first time moms, but a physician saying, here's where you can go for credible information, that would be an amazing way to like extend that conversation.
Right, and I completely agree. I think the difficulty is, like, the digital media, social media is a moving target, right? So,
Yes, of course.
what happens? Like, right,
Yeah.
like, we can recommend all the time books because we know what's in the book, right? It's the
Yeah.
book's not gonna be edited,
Right.
you know? But,
Yeah.
like, the if we recommend a influencer and they shift their viewpoint to something that we might not
Right.
support, then that gets a little bit tricky.
It'd be like the
Um
Mayo Clinic, it'd have to be
Right,
very,
exactly, exactly.
very
That's why I
sort of
say healthy
legacy.
children's, right? Like healthy
Mhm.
children's from the AAP, like, right? I know that's that's reviewed by multiple people. It's almost like a
Mhm.
peer-reviewed source. But I think
Mhm.
what people are also saying too is that you can buy publications now to be in science journals.
Mhm.
Um, you can pay like a
Yeah.
couple $1,000s and have your research published. And so
Oh,
there's a
good.
lot of that peer review that's being missed in
Yeah.
science.
Oh my gosh, that's terrible. Well, are there any other just final questions? We're almost at time and we've had a lot of good questions and a lot of really good discussion. Yes, not in a reputable journal.
Oh, for sure.
You are
For
right,
sure.
Jen. Those are not. Yeah, I just had never thought about that. This was very eye-opening for me, thinking that of doctors kind of extending the conversation. Like, where do you go? Like, are you wearing a seatbelt? How much are you drinking a day? Where are you getting your medical
Exactly.
information?
I think it'd
Right.
be so powerful, right? And we can
Yeah.
help guide families on where to seek that information.
Right.
Because I'm actually something kind of to add to that, parents I know are going to Chat GPT or Copilot to ask their questions. And so
Mhm.
I just did a research study looking at the quality of parent guidance with the
Mhm.
most common questions.
Oh, what
And
did you find?
and what we found is that Chat GPT was not wrong, but it wasn't helpful. It was just like very
Mhm.
very bland and just like and it, you know, it was developmental behavioral questions. So my 2-year-old's tantruming, what do I do? And it gave you like 10 pages of what you're supposed to do.
Right.
Is
And
it like
so,
how do you like implement this and what does this mean and is it normal? Is it not normal? Right? So
uh,
it wasn't wrong.
nuance,
Right. It's exactly
nuance
that
not
nuance
there.
that you have to have that relationship. Right.
Absolutely. That's interesting. That's very interesting. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Milkovich. This has been so fun. I can't believe it's just flown. So grateful. And then for everybody on the call, we will post this tomorrow on our YouTube page. Again, that's Boots on the Ground Midwest. That's the YouTube page. And for those of you who want to take our newsletter, we have a Substack, again, Boots on the Ground Midwest. You can also sign up for it on our website, bootsonthegroundmidwest.org. If you're in the Kansas City area, we do tons of things. We protest weekly. We have lots of forums. We do a ton. And then we also have these amazing Wednesday workshops virtually. Our next one, should I have the exact date in front of me? Yes. Do I know? But look, in our newsletter is about fascism. It's a second part in fascism, sort of an "Are we there yet?" thing. So follow us to get the final information about that. And again, thank you so much, Dr. Milkovich.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Great talking with you. Thanks, everybody. And you'll have to tell Gail that I said hello. I'll see her soon. So fun.
Do you, do you need me for anything? I was just going to,
No, you're good.
okay,
You're good.
cool.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.